Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about 3 very important things when it comes to making realistic wildlife art: shapes, value, and curiosity, and a little bit of compassion as well. Then we're going to sketch this gorgeous kookaburra together using a single coloured pencil. All right, let's begin. Hello and welcome back to this little wild studio of mine. Happy New Year! Is it too late to say Happy New Year? I don't think so. No, not at all. Happy New Year. I am just looking forward to this year being so full of creativity and connection and joy. We need more joy, I think. Everybody can use more joy in their life, right? Something that brings me great joy is honouring our wildlife, our wild kin, through sketching, drawing, painting, anything creative. And so today, spoiler alert, unusual, I know, we're going to look at some more wildlife. I thought that this time I might talk to you about 3 things that are always going to make a huge difference to how realistic your art making is, if you're going for realism. And that's what I talk about in Hedgerow, in my community, in the Wild Sketchbook, in my large course, and Drawn to Wild, which is another course that I released last year that is self-paced. And these 3 things are necessary in every single painting or drawing that you do. And that is shapes, value, and curiosity. And then I threw in compassion there too, because that's important, and there's a big set of this a big part of this mindset that we really need as artists and as well-hearted human beings. So when I refer to shapes, I mean we want to almost like a sculpture, start with the largest possible shapes. When we're sketching from scratch, which is what I will talk about, start with the largest possible shapes and then slowly but surely wheedle them down to smaller shapes, shapes being 2-dimensional. I don't know, apparently this means 2-dimensional in my hand language. And then we start to utilise things like value to bring form, to bring roundedness, to feel like you're physically able to pat the being that you're honouring. Shapes have to come first. Value then comes in, which helps us again, as I said, create form. But value has so much more importance in creating realistically than colour ever will, which is why you can always create something very realistic in, for example, graphite, black and white, right? You will still get, the birds are a bit noisy today, sorry about that. Or not sorry, enjoy. And then finally, curiosity. So we have to ask questions as we're working, questions about our own capabilities and understanding. So what am I seeing here? How can I utilise my tools to describe that in pigment? But also notice when some of those really itchy and stretchy feelings come up, like I can't do this. This is not going to be good enough. I could never show this to anybody else. I'm never going to be able to do this. Everyone's going to laugh if they see this. All of those thoughts are absolutely normal, but we can still make art anyway. And we get to do that with curiosity and compassion. So curiosity, why is that thought coming up? Is that really what other people would think? Does it even matter what other people would think, you know? We're never going to feel the same sense of accomplishment when it comes to external validation versus internal validation. So if we can say to ourselves, you know what, I am learning. Beginner's mind is always very important. I am learning. I am embracing the skills that I have now, and I have a desire to grow those skills. I can only do that by continuing to show up, by showing curiosity and extending myself so much compassion as I'm extending the well-being that I'm studying. And it's a process. I have to understand that it's a practice. We don't get up and start walking one day. We don't get into a car and suddenly know how to drive. We don't pick up a pen when we're babies and learn how to and know how to write. We have to learn all of these things. All of these things take time. It's as big a part of the apprenticeship of life as anything else is. So we want to maintain curiosity and compassion. So I thought the way that we might do that is to do a drawing similar to what I have done in the course Drawn to Wild, which is now available as a self-paced course where we work through 52 different tutorials over the course of, I released them once a week, but if you purchase it now, you have access to all of them at once. I would still really recommend doing one a week to give yourself time in between to understand and learn in a compassionate and sustainable way, rather than, you know, feeling like you've got to get it all done at once. But throughout this course, we chose one pencil each week, one colour and a reference, and then I showed you how to approach that in exactly the same way as what we're going to do today. And so now at the end of the year, I have this gorgeous sketchbook, and so do so many of our other participants, just filled with wonder. And all of these happened in, 1 to 2 hours a week. Each of these lessons are under 1 hour, but I do tend to work fairly quickly. And yeah, it's like a body of work built over a year with so much love, so much kindness, so much attention, so much connection, not perfection, always connection, not perfection. And so yeah, we're going to do something similar today. So I've chosen a pencil. I'll show you a bit more of that towards the end perhaps. I've chosen a pencil which is a Polychromos Middle Cadmium Red 217. It's not very sharp at the moment, that's okay. I've got my sharpener here to do that later. I drew those words on there and they look fancy, don't they? They're not fancy, don't look too close. And we're going to work on a kookaburra, I think. So we're going to look at this kookaburra, which is an Australian native bird. They're part of the kingfisher family, though they're very large compared to a normal kingfisher. It's around about that size. A kookaburra is probably about that size. They're a fairly large bird. Yeah, so we can look at a kookaburra. I don't know what else I was going to say there. I want to show you, this is something that I do in all of my lessons, in Hedgerow, Wild Sketchbook, Drawn to Wild, See the Wild, Wild Beginnings, all of it, because I think it's really important for us to practice seeing this part, is I'll show you the big shapes and then we'll carve into that. We'll bring those shapes into smaller shapes and then eventually we turn them into form. So smaller shapes I see, the very first one I see is this here. Of course, this great big, am I on the right layer? Yes. This great big round shape. And then there's another round shape sitting on top of it. And then there's this line of the branch and then this sort of rounded off area of the tail. Now, if I turn off the photo, that's the biggest shapes, right? That is the large shape. Maybe you should have added the beak in, but that's where we start from. Then we start to build in the next lot of shapes. So the beak, right? The way that it intrudes onto the circle, this big circle, whereabouts in here that the eye is, the way that the head rounds off and down onto the larger circle here. The fact that we've got a couple of little cylinders here for feet. They've got tiny feet compared to their faces. And then we can start breaking down even further. So we can see that we've got wing and tail. Okay, we've got wing and chest. And then we've got some markings on the bird too. But we don't try and tackle all of that at once. We want to find the large shapes and then get smaller and smaller and smaller, and then we'll start to use value to build out form. So always I say, let's just have a go and see what we can do. All right, let's have a go. It's quite dark outside. It's been crazy hot. Summer here in Australia. Today is lovely and cool and a little bit wet, a bit rainy, but it also seems to be quite a bit of wind. So We're going to have the calling of birds to keep us entertained, and hopefully it doesn't get too windy and I have to shut the window because it's very nice having that breeze in here at the moment. All right, my pencil's not very sharp at the moment. I'm happy with it being quite blunt while I get these big shapes down, and then once I start to want to get some details in, I'll use my sharpener to get some pointage happening. All right, so always as I make these, I don't worry about the lines that I'm making being left on the page. So I've got that big shape, I've got the branch. I think particularly when you're starting, when you're finding the shape, it's a great idea to leave your pencil on the page as much as possible. Keep moving your eye around and find those shapes. All right, we've got that first big shape there. That's a corella in the background, if you're wondering what bird's making those noises. And next I'm going to refine those shapes a little bit. So I want to add in, I want to look at the angle of this beak and how far out does it sit from the body. So this is just the next part of these very large shapes, right? We're not moving into form yet. Now I can see that I can refine that shape a little on this side, bring it out a little further. I can refine this shape a little bit with this wing. I think I need to bring the tail down a bit. There's this wing on this side, and that sort of comes up here. And then we've got the wing coming out on this side here. So we've got a chunkier, more robust body happening. Then look at the shape of the outside. What's the shape of the air here into the neck? That'll help give you a understanding as well. So now we've gone from that very first big broad shape to a more refined shape. I've still got my pencil lines everywhere, doesn't matter. They'll sort of disappear into the drawing as we go. And if they don't, I can bring my eraser in. There's no trouble with that at all either. It's another tool to use. I just think it's a really good idea not to use it too much in this first stage. Let's look at where the feet are. So this foot is a cylinder here. And then this one is here somewhere. And then just like that, we've got our basic shape. So that's whereabouts is this eye? I can see it's around about in the middle of this shape of the head here. And the eye is always relative to the beak, right? So this is the upper mandible. This is the lower mandible, so the top and the bottom of the beak. And this area here where that hinge is the gape, right? And the eye on a cooker is above that here somewhere. Look at relationships. Look at relationships. Get curious. Where does that line up with? Is there something that I can use as an anchor that might alert me to where something else belongs? How can I use my pencil to describe that? So you can see this whole time I'm way back on my pencil here. That's the value range that we're going to get. Something really light here. It's still quite a dark pigment to something fairly dark. So I know I can get darks like around the eye. The eye is probably the darkest parts of the wings. And then where we see what the bird is white is very little white. There's sort of bluish white down here. It's all layers of kind of dirty orangey colours. All of that's going to be this colour. There's nothing that's really pure white that I would say in there. So now we've moved from shapes, so we're going to start bringing in value. This whole time we've been using curiosity and also compassion. You're going to get two parts where you're like, oh, this is nothing like what I'm seeing. You want to keep going. You want to be curious about how you can continue making marks to get to a point that might end up looking like a kookaburra in this case. And you want to say, good for me for showing up. And it's okay if I don't get it exactly right because we're going for connection I want to feel kookaburra energy, not perfection. We can always choose to leave the white of the paper for our brightest highlights, but note that there's not really any really bright highlights across the belly here. So I'm going to put something in pretty much everywhere just to start. Then we've got the feet, which I'll come back to. Actually, we'll do down here first. Got some of these gorgeous stripes on the tail feathers. And we can't see them all perfectly because the tail is all bunched up underneath here, but we can see different shapes, and we can move our pencils around to try and get some of that feeling in there. Remembering that we're not going for perfection, we're going for connection. And a lot of connection is feeling, right? So what's the feeling of feathers? How can we imitate them? There's a much darker area to the feathers there. Come up here, you can actually see a little bit of his blue on the wings there. All right, and then this branch. So the branch is quite dark underneath. We're going to want to make sure that we get the feeling of roundedness for the branch, right? It's not flat, it's round. So how can we do that? Well, we know just by looking that underneath is darkest. It's in shadow because the main point of light is the sun, so it's shining from above. We're going to have some bright light somewhere, so there's quite a lot of light in the front. You can see there's reflective light along here, so we'll keep all that area light as well. And then we want to refine these feet a little bit. So I'm looking at the way that these 3 tiny toes for this large bird move. A foot goes up in here. Very rough. We will get more detail as we go. We're just having these, we're still working in shapes at the moment with just the smallest amount of value. Really take note of the shapes that you're seeing, the way that the lines move around, or how you can use your line, your pencil line, to describe. Note that the end of the beak has a little curve, a little hook here, and that it extends over the bottom. It's lighter on the top of the beak there, and it's quite dark elsewhere. So keep an eye on where the darkest parts are. Note that there's a little bit of a lip where his lips are. Bring some dark in. Again, we're going for connection, not perfection. This is a fairly quick sketch, so my main concern is to enjoy my process. And find some curiosity and wonder about this being that I am honouring. So the beak underneath is a lot less dark, so it has less value, but there is an area under here that's pretty dark. If you squint at an image, you're going to get a better understanding of your values. You're going to see darks and lights a lot easier. And when you squint at the beak there, you can see that this value here and up onto the beak, the top of the beak here, is quite similar. There's that little break there, and the feathers coming out. Do you see? I don't know if you're going to be able to see. There's a little bit of a flat spot on my pencil. That's when I start to turn, before it gets too flat. Under the chin there is a little darker than you might think. Oh, I'm so happy about the sound of that rain. It's the little things. I've got this dark spot. A bit of yellow up in here. A little bit more value, a little bit darker in that area. Area here where the neck feathers sort of turned a little bit, so we've got a bit of shadow cast. Follows up to the beak there, so this section of feathers. A little bit darker again here. Sit back. Okay, what needs adjusting? Keep moving forward. Now, these feathers here have all of these subtleties of shifts of colour and value on them, and we can spend time and go through all of them, or we can try and think about the feeling of them. So if I was to do that in a more simplistic way, how would it feel? How can we use our pencil to describe those feathers sitting one on top of each other without having to do each and every single one? We look at little shapes made by value. So dark and light shapes. What's the dark and light shapes look like there? How can I get a little bit of that happening to give the impression of these feathers rather than needing to draw each and every feather? Making sure my wing matches up here. And another cylinder. I can hear galah out there as well, which is a pink and grey parrot. And putting a few of those little lines in. We've got the branch here. And note that there's dark and light bits to the branch as well. So what can we do to show that? So same thing. I'm contorting myself a little bit so I don't have to move the book, but you should move your book around to make things easier for you yourself. You don't have to contort yourself. It's your book. A little bit of dark around the toes there. Note that the branch is not completely flat, so there's a little curve happening. Dark under here. So we see the feathers underneath are darker. There's some markings on the branch. The branch is also wet. Maybe it's been raining. Maybe he hasn't been walking around so much in the grass, but he will have been walking around the grass as well. Jumping down to get lizards, frogs, crickets. Okay. So now I'm looking at this branch, this stick that they're on, and asking myself, is that enough value? Have I got enough darks and lights to describe the branch there? I think that's okay at the moment. Let's get down onto the tail here. The tail, the thing I most want to include on this tail is some of these markings, which we've already started to put in. And I'm not going to confuse myself too much by trying to figure out what part of the tail feathers is where. I want to look at the shapes of these dark banding and think about how I can join them together or keep them separate in order to make the patterning that goes on in the light coloured part of their tail. Fill in some darkness of this wing, which if I squint at the image is just about as dark as the branch. The branch is only subtly darker. So I'm going to add another layer to the branch there. Put some feathery strokes in there. I'm going to get some more of these bands happening. And that, my friends, is Kookaburra. So I hope that that helped a little in showing a bit about my practice in how I think it's important to connect with your work and with your tender wild heart and honour your practice as a means of connection rather than perfection. To stay curious, because in curiosity we can extend compassion as we learn more about our subject and ourselves. And we can also mitigate the fears that come up if we stay curious as well. It doesn't mean anything's wrong when those fears come up, quite the opposite. It just shows that you're a compassionate human being that has feelings. But we can choose what we do with those feelings too. We can choose to remember that we're safe inside our sketchbook, and that we want to learn, we want to have beginner's mind, we want to keep growing our skills. And to do that means that we have to be pushed every now and then, we have to be curious, but we can do it all with compassion. All right, my friends, I hope that you enjoyed Kookaburra. If you would like to do more of these sorts of drawings, then come on over and have a look at Drawn to Wild, where we've looked at a different animal each week, and you have access to 52 lessons, very similar to what we've done today. Lots of extra learning and skills, lots of love and compassion, and so much fun. All right, I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next week here in the Wild Studio. Keep sketching, my friends. Keep curious, keep compassionate, let your creativity connect you to what is wild and wondrous in this world. And that includes you. All right, see you next time.